Yeah, I've had a very interesting relationship with my politician identity over the last 5 years. Um, I'm quite lucky in one sense because I get to exist in lots of different arenas, environments, and in other words, I kept pretty much all my jobs after I took on the role of being an elected representative by necessity because it is not remunerated enough for it to be a full time job. But I would also say that I was so committed and passionate and enthusiastic about all my other work that I wasn't inclined to let it go. There is a constant juggle and struggle to find balance in my life and to sustain high quality me across all the areas that I work. But what has been super interesting is so when you are at a meeting or you're in a room and you're meeting people for the first time and you do the intros, I'm inclined to crack the joke that call myself the man of 1,000 identities, and then to reel off a couple of them and maybe decide on, depending on the arena I'm in, which identities to front load. And I'm going to be very honest and say not once have I, unless it's a very, very specific environment where you are the elected representative in that environment. But otherwise, I'd be less inclined to add the word politician to my identities. I'm very comfortable saying I'm a youth worker. First and foremost, that's my trade. I am an educator, which means I facilitate groups. I design education courses, resources. I teach in a college. I am also a coordinator, stroke manager. I've managed youth centres. I coordinate youth councils. And yet, along the way, it's been super interesting for me to wonder, when do I include this I am a politician identity? And the reason why I think it's actually important is because if I'm not willing to say it, if I'm not comfortable saying it, if I'm reluctant to say it, then it hasn't really been infused into my collection of identities. And that's something that I really need to sit with and consider. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Am I a politician or am I a youth worker in politics? Am I an activist in politics? Am I an educator in politics? Or am I a politician who also does youth work, education, facilitation, group work, management, coordination, parenthood? Interesting. If I am operating in other spaces simultaneously while being a public representative, then I get to draw on my experience in those spaces, and they get to inform both me as a person and who I am and how I see the world and what's going on out there. But I also get to draw that in to add extra insight into how I do politics. So, for example, as a trainer of trauma-informed practice, I get to deliver trainings with caring professionals across the country who are on the front lines, working with the most vulnerable in our society. And in the experience of me delivering trauma training to them, I'm also drawing from the stories that they share, the experiences that they're having on those front lines, the people that they're meeting, the vulnerabilities that are present there, the challenges that they're facing, and ultimately the huge, huge value that being trauma informed brings to environments where trauma survivors are present. And that gives me so much hope for the future and is so inspiring about the people we rely on to do the caring roles across our communities. And at the same time, I take from that and bring it into the political arena. And I'm genuinely trying to shine a light on the value of being trauma informed in that space also, because I think that would also add value. We have as politicians, we have an interface with the public. We often spend time, share spaces with the most vulnerable in our communities because they might present to us with particular issues that are causing them struggle. But at the same time, in the county council itself, in the local authority, there is an interface with the general public. And similarly, that might be in a place where there is tension, where there is vulnerability, where people are heightened, where they are maybe dysregulated, or they are carrying issues of experiences that have happened to them in their lives that are affecting how they see themselves, how they see the world, how they see other people. And that might manifest in challenging behavior or otherwise. So, and that's one thread of my life. I deliver trauma-informed practice training regularly, and I think that enhances who I am as a political representative. Also, if I was to shine a light on the spaces that I share with young people, how could I not draw from that? How could that not both inspire me and also inform me about what are the current lived experiences of young people in Ireland today that we need to consider, take on board, be informed by, be challenged by, be inspired by, or simply include in the workings of what it means to be a political representative within a local authority. Seeing young people up close and hearing what life is like for them, and then including that in our considerations and deliberations is everything. If we are trying to develop a climate action plan and don't include young people and their voice in that, then we're really at nothing. If we aren't wondering what it means to be a young person in modern Ireland and to manage the cost of living, to manage a future in terms of housing, to stay connected to their community, or to be equipped to navigate elsewhere if that's where they want to go in order to flourish. All of those elements are important for us to take on board. What does it mean to be a young person in Ireland today and to be safe? Are we creating communities that are safe? What does it mean to be a young person in Ireland today and to experience education in a way that provides the building blocks for a positive future? And we can strip all that down and think about, well, how do what education places are available to me? How do I get there? And all of those elements have a degree of local authority responsibility attached to them. And that's, again, really both exciting and challenging for us. How do we organize outdoor amenities for the young people in our communities? And how do we differentiate between the simple option of providing all sports stuff, or considering what are the needs of teenage girls in our communities in terms of outdoor amenities, places to gather, to be safe, to be able to connect, to enjoy the outdoors. I could go on and on and on. But again, I'm very lucky that I get to share spaces with young people on a regular basis, and I get to harvest all of that knowledge and insight from them, and then include that in how I represent as an elected official. You know what? It was probably the part of being an elected representative that I was least prepared for, if I'm being honest. Often people think being a politician is about speaking in the chamber, on the radio, giving speeches, public meetings maybe, sitting on committees, going to events, and all of that is part of being a public rep. But I knew that alongside that there would be interpersonal stuff. There would be people bringing their issues to me and asking for my support, or wanting to explore how I could play a role in supporting them to have their needs met. What I wasn't really prepared for was the depth that would be present in those type of engagements. So if you think about, and I use it often as an example, if you think about an iceberg, and above the water is a small amount that you have this surface level connection with people. And I would have thought that a lot of the local representation would be around people presenting an issue, you explaining and exploring how you can play a role. You might be advocating, you might be passing it on, you might be giving it to the appropriate department in the council, and then checking up on its progress. And again, that is part of the role. But what I've found is that when you work a certain way, and perhaps it's because of the way that I work, that interpersonal connection is really important to me, and it's something that I value a lot. And my approach to working with people is always about connection, and the deeper we build a connection, the more meaningful our work will be together, and it's really just that shared humanity piece, and especially if it's vulnerable people. So I know, because of my training, that if I'm working with a vulnerable person, that safety and connection is the priority, because they might have barriers to connection. Their experience of the world, of other politicians, of the political arena, or other spaces where they've been looking for help might have been negative. And as a way of protecting themselves from more negativity, they might be a bit guarded, or they might downplay their expectations, or they might be reluctant to share all the details. And all of that is very legitimate. And I know that, and I feel that. And therefore, when I am connecting with people and working with them, whether it's by text or on the phone or in person, I am so mindful of the importance of safety and connection, and that being sincere and authentic. And what I've found is that, and these are the things, it's so interesting as a politician that we live in the public domain, and visibility and optics are a big part of it, to different levels and in different degrees depending on the politicians you pay attention to. But this is the stuff that wouldn't be appearing on my Facebook feed. The connections that I develop with people who are really, really perhaps at their lowest point, or struggling with what life has presented to them in these moments, and really suffering that. And then I'm drawn into that space to play a role, a very specific role as a public representative, a very boundaried role as well, in terms of how I present what I can do, and how I honor the boundaries of that without, it's really, really important to me that I don't spoof, I don't spin, I don't make promises that I can't deliver, that I do truth telling, that I sit with the discomfort, but beneath it all, that there's a compassion. And I really think that that approach has meant that I've been drawn into people's stories, or invited into people's stories. And what an absolute privilege that is, to be invited into someone's story, without necessarily a huge expectation of the story ending happily for everyone, or the success of it being immediate. I've worked with people who I'm still working with, and I may have began the journey with them 5 years ago. And what has been the greatest privilege for me is to have built up these meaningful connections, where it might be that we've been through the tough moments together. We've picked up the pieces of a failure in terms of an outcome that we were striving for that didn't manifest. And yet people allow me to be present for picking up the pieces of that. I could talk about some of the very emotional and sincere expressions of gratitude that I've received from people who did get their needs met, who did get a result, which I would always say they're entitled to. And that's why their needs are being met, because they're entitled to it. And yet they will still find a place for a recognition of the part that I might have played in that regard. I would always say it in my youth work role, that youth workers are not the heroes of anyone else's story. We are extras in their story. We come in, we play a role for a period of time, and we exit when we are no longer needed. And I think politicians in many ways are the same, is that we come in during a period of time where we might be needed. We play a role to the best of our abilities, and then we exit when we're not needed anymore. And what has been really wonderful for me is that when I exit, that there's still a loose connection there, where there's still a bit of checking in. There's still, when I meet people on the street, or a message on social media saying how are things, how are you getting on, and again that's so genuine that it has really, in many ways enhanced the circles of connection that are available to me in my life. And that the last thing I would say about it as well is that there's a profound sense of responsibility in there. And for me, I now carry those stories with me. And they are stories of interpersonal connection, but they are also stories that inform my views on policy. They are stories that inform how I behave as a politician, what I am driven to fight for in terms of change, in terms of better approaches, and in terms of change at the meta level, but also change at local level. And it really drives my solidarity for people who are on the margins, who are perhaps the most vulnerable in our communities, who have been dealt maybe a hand that through no fault of their own has meant that they don't get equal opportunities, don't get the same chances as everyone else, the same benefits, don't have the connections maybe, or who have had experiences in life, traumas perhaps, that have meant that they are on some levels prevented from flourishing, prevented from being their best selves, prevented from in this moment accessing all the things that they're entitled to. And for me to take a responsibility into that space and to bring in fairness, again, and I wouldn't expect every other elected rep to have the same degree of capacity as I do in this regard, and it's it's something that is not accidental, that I've trained for a long time to be able to do this stuff. But it's something I would say to all potential and prospective politicians, that to do this well requires a level of capacity, and I think it certainly should be included in any training that's offered, any education, either after being elected or within the campaigning timeline for people who have ambitions around being an elected representative. Because I don't know, for me the responsibility in that regard is huge, and the other side of that is the potential impact that you have, where how I am with people as a politician might influence their view broadly of politics, or at least give them reference points for the type of politicians that they think should represent them. I would say the thing that people would be most surprised, I don't know, whether they would be surprised or not, is that I am an introvert. So even though I operate in the public domain, I have to perform in front of people often, and not just in the political world, but also across a lot of my other roles, that I must present myself to people, hold the stage, be up front, be responsible for delivering content, for bringing people on learning journeys, for telling the truth, for advocating, for expressing a level of understanding about something, for making proposals for how things should be, and also dealing with a lot of different types of people, whether that's a chamber with 31 other councillors from across the county, and in many ways only one that I can rely on to be fully on my side all the time, and that's the other shinner. But people tend to be surprised when I tell them that I'm an introvert. And what that means essentially is that I do not draw energy from my time with other people. So while I have worked very hard to build my capacity to be in spaces with others, to perform at high levels, to do connection very well, and to yeah, bring my best self, my most professional self, my funny self, whatever the case may be, that I am very comfortable working in groups and working with others, and whether they are people I'm meeting for the first time or people I've known for a long time, whether they are allies or adversaries, I have a way of working in those spaces that I'm very proud of in terms of how I carry myself. But in truth, those spaces I don't are not spaces where I draw energy. So extroverts take energy from other people, and that's what motivates them to be in spaces with groups, to want to be chatting, connecting, all the things. And that's why they are even visibly energetic in that regard. And that's not me. So I draw energy from being able to find time to be on my own, to do solitary, to have quality time in my own space, with my own head, doing my own thing. And to be fair, my family would know that about me as well, that's how I regenerate, is solitary. And it's not solitary in the kind of tragic sense of being lonely, but that's where I need to recuperate. That's where I need to recharge, where I need to draw energy in, is having the headspace, having the lack of stimulation or stimulation on my own terms. That's super important to me. And it's a funny one because I am so comfortable being in my own space. And I came across something recently about how fundamentally important it is to each of us to understand how our comfort with and our sense of awareness around self is actually a fundamental part of how we do connection and relationships, and meet the world and all its challenges in a way that has maybe enough resilience to manage the tough times. But I am an introvert, and maybe on some level it's good to show people out there that introverts can be politicians. Maybe not good politicians, I don't know, but introverts can be politicians.